Schweikert, who's a former astronaut, who is working on this, to try, first of all, to make an inventory of how many are these asteroids, what are their orbits, and which are the asteroids which are likely to be near misses or near hits for the Earth. So that inventory is being made on computers. Now, the question is, if it's a large enough asteroid, I'm sorry, you can do nothing. Just relax and enjoy it and prepare to die. That's all that will happen, because you are back to the dinosaur age. If it's a small one, then you may be able to deflect it just enough. And we've had a couple of near misses recently. Articles are available on this. There was an article, I think, in The Economist 3 or 4 weeks ago. So we know there is material available on the asteroid dangers to outer space, from outer space. Please note that the vast majority of these asteroids, which are small, are hitting us all the time. You're getting at least 1,000 hitting the Earth every month, but they get burnt up in the atmosphere, and that is what you call shooting stars. So it looks very pretty, but actually it is a hit averted. And so much for asteroids from outer space. I move to Lehigh for 2 questions from Lehigh. And we may have just enough time for a second round of 1 question each if we have time after Lehigh. Over to you from Lehigh, 2 questions.
Good morning, good morning. First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Calvin Reed. I'm a graduate student with Lehigh University, and I'd like to say thank you to the ambassador for hosting and facilitating today's event, and also thank you to Mr. Rydell for your remarks thus far. Basically, my question is, we're all familiar with the way phones are wired or tapped. I was wondering whether or not the technology exists to read what's on satellites that don't necessarily belong to our nation, and whether or not that information or technology can be utilized by the United Nations to, in a sense, police nations and their satellites that would seek to take away personal freedoms, threaten privacy, and or weaponize space. Thank you.
Second question.
Hello, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Diego Liriano Jr. I'm a first-year student at Lehigh University. And again, thank you, Mr. Kamal and Rydell, for facilitating this event. My question is concerning liability. I know Kamal earlier mentioned about the debris coming down from outer space into Earth atmosphere, and whose fault is it when one of these debris actually comes into contact with one of our aircrafts, and then the lives that are taken would be very unfortunate, and somebody would need to take responsibility. Now, my question is, does this concern of liability extend into outer space? And especially just because, first of all, I think it's amazing that the trajectory of this Russian satellite and a U.S. satellite would actually coincide. I would think that there would be some sort of way for all the nations in order to communicate and fill themselves in on each other's trajectories, because a simple modification would have prevented that. Whose responsibility or whose fault is it that this happened, and who takes this $250 million price tag?
Superb second question. Congratulations on this liability, which I would like you to address. But on the first question, which was, why don't you answer that also? But I'd like to comment on that later.
There's very little that I can say about this, both because of my own ignorance of the details of the International Convention on Liability. The convention was concluded in 1972, and the fundamental principle that applies in that convention, as far as I understand it, is that any damage that is caused by an object that has been launched from the Earth, that the responsibility, the absolute responsibility, I believe, is the term used in the convention. Absolute responsibility for that damage is borne by the launching state. That is the state from which the satellite left the ground. That is the state that has to bear responsibility. As far as I know, to the best of my understanding, and I may be wrong on this, that would include damage not just when the satellite lands on Earth and causes damage to an aircraft or a facility or property or a human, but I think it would also apply to damage caused in space. But I would have to check that. If you wish to look into that, you can. The UN has a website for international treaties, and you can get the full text of the liability. It's called the Liability Convention, and it's not a very long document, and but that will definitively answer your question for you. But that's my best understanding of it. No, I don't know enough about the technology of monitoring the transmissions or information received by satellites. I think it's hard enough to even identify locations of these satellites rather than actually get into the information that they're transferring. A lot of the information is highly encrypted that's in these satellites. For example, your bank records. I'm sure you would not want the UN or any other enterprise examining the details of your financial transactions that are being broadcast through space. I mean, there's a lot of efforts that seeks to protect that information in the name of privacy, and that applies to communications, financial transactions, and many other things. So I'm very skeptical of both the technical possibility of being able to do that, but also the wisdom of having the United Nations in effect become Big Brother in being the omniscient, all-seeing entity. I think it would be not the right way to go.
I'd like to take on that first question with a supplementary comment. You see, all the information that is picked up by a satellite ultimately has to be transferred down to Earth, because it's no use if it is just sitting out in outer space. It has to come back to human beings on Earth, otherwise it's no use. So the communication or the transmission of that information back to Earth is on channels which are easy to identify because they can be monitored. And that's why the word encryption then comes in. You don't leave it as open conversation, you encrypt it. But encryption, anything that can be encrypted can be decrypted. That's the basic rule. There is no such thing as fail-safe encryption. Encryption is only a delaying device, like a lock. There is not a single lock that cannot be opened. A lock is only a delaying device for a locksmith, and so is encryption. And so the chances are that you can decrypt almost anything over a period of time as a communication between a satellite and the people watching it from Earth. The exception to this is the software which is loaded onto the satellite itself. That software, the question is, can I somehow learn by tapping into that software as to what type of software you are producing? That is much more difficult, because all that I can do is to infer the quality of that software from the communication and the encryption. But I cannot go up there and read the software myself. We have enough difficulties even trying to decrypt the software of Microsoft Windows on Earth. And so that is a much more difficult problem, the patenting of the software on the satellite. I hope we've given you some answers to your very, very intelligent questions. I think we have time for one question. I need to know, first of all, whether Lockhaven is back online or not. And if not, then we have time for one more question from the four